Well, welcome. Good evening. It's very good to see you all. Whoever is going to join us is going to join us. The rest, I guess, would be listening to this conversation in the recording via Facebook or whatever other media channel we're going to upload it to. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce my very dear friend of many years, Father Jerome Cwiklinski. He's there in this white square, as you could see. Oh, it's him there. Some of you know him, some of you don't, but I'm looking forward to his story. This conversation was actually initiated, or we had an idea to have this talk um, way before something started, any of the riots and any of the violence. But I wanted to address various issues of compatibility or not compatibility of violence, bearing arms, serving in the army and things of that nature, and Christian ethos. And since, for the most part, those who engage into discussion never saw a firearm except in an action movie that many of us have guilty pleasure to engage to, and conversation, of course, ranging from being pacifist to an extreme to defense the violence by all means possible. Very often, a real people who saw a real action and saw those arms being used are part of the discussion, especially in a unique way of being a priest who serves those military men. On my Facebook page, right underneath the announcement about this conversation with Father Jerome, there is a little clip that I wanted, in a way, to sum up an attempt to set the line or the main theme of this discussion, and it's a clip from the movie The Last Castle, with Bradford and Gandolfini playing main protagonists. And please watch that clip. It really addresses the issue of understanding of the reality of violence versus perception that the true man, regardless of whether Christian or not, supposed to defend not only the bearing of arms, but being really a strong man and strong armed man. It was for me in many ways a cultural shock, even as a young man, so almost a quarter century ago, when I came from the country that just disintegrated, former Soviet Union, to the United States, as there was kind of pride, many of people, among them my clergy colleagues and fellow parishioners, were in a very exalted sense demonstrating their collections of firearms and arsenals. And to my question why, the answer was given, haven't you read the US Constitution? I still, even 25 years later, could not understand what the Constitution, a document written in particular circumstances, have to do with dozens upon dozens of automatic weapons stored in private residences. Maybe I'm still culturally very different, and at the same time not being pacifist by any stretch of imagination. At times you could see me posting pictures from visits to tank museums and such, and even myself parading in a Roman military helmet. So I'm really taking the blame of having a guilty pleasure in the army subject. I still could not understand that absence of understanding, perhaps, as to what we Christians at least supposed to preach. What we're going to do in extreme circumstances, nobody knows, and perhaps many of us would act in a very particular way that is very far from what gospel calls us to do. But nevertheless, under more or less normal circumstances where we live in glass houses, not as a figurative speech, but in quite exact definition of our dwellings, having those arsenals perhaps stands for something more. Well, in order to talk about this and about so much more, I invited Father Jerome again to share his unique perspective, his unique vision as a devout Orthodox Christian and at the same time a chaplain in the actively functioning armed forces. So I welcome Father Jerome, and I thank him profoundly for accepting my invitation. And is this intended as question and answer session? Nevertheless, I'll give you the way to talk, to introduce yourself, to tell who you are, and then perhaps to address some of these themes that I touched upon, and we'll see where it would go from there. Thank you, Father.
All right, you're welcome, and I'm pleased to be here. And I'm sorry about the poor screen quality. A little while you will see me. Right now you don't, but when the sun goes down, perhaps it'll get better. Well, I've been a priest for 35 years, and that entire time has been, my priesthood has been devoted to the military. My first parish was the chapel at the United States Military Academy at West Point, and we're trying to fix the light, okay, but the, and then, I've been at Camp Pendleton for many assignments. So, excuse me 1 second here, but I'm being distracted. I'm trying to fix the light here.
Is that better?
No, nothing's making a difference. All right, that's enough. It's good. When the sun goes down, it'll get better.
Yes, if you get a little bit closer to the camera, we could see at least your face a little bit better. Yes.
Well, maybe. Yeah. Okay. Then it's going to get old sitting like this. So, even in retirement, I chose to continue to serve the military because, well, for one thing, I wasn't replaced. The other thing is that the need is still there. We still have Orthodox men and women who enlist. Unfortunately, I can't get to them all, just the ones who are joining the Marine Corps. So, it's an important ministry to reach out to an age group that is absent in most of our parishes. Well, I just want to back up a little bit and maybe introduce the theme gradually, and hopefully some of the historical perspective will allow us to address some of the concerns that bring us here together on the subject of war and violence. Of course, today was the Sunday of All Saints, and included in that number are warrior saints, which included the witnesses of our Lord's miracles and his death, the centurions, Longinus, early convert Cornelius. There were those who served honorably and successfully until they were forced to sacrifice to idols and then refused and became martyrs, such as St. George, St. Demetrius, St. Procopius, the 40 martyrs of Sevaste, St. Theodore Stradolates. There were great warrior saints, reputed not so much for their valor, even though they were great warriors, but for other things, other virtues that they manifested, such as St. Alexander Nevsky, King Stefan Dechany, Saints Boris and Gleb. Please note that, unless you correct me, the monk Alexander Peretsvit, who fought at Kulikovo, was not canonized, even though he's honored as a great hero. And then you had your veteran saints, St. Theodore Ushakov and St. Juvenali of Alaska, who had successful naval careers and then retreated to monastic or a semi-monastic lifestyle. And even some chaplains. St. Innocent of Akutsk, before he became a missionary bishop, was a priest in the fledgling Russian Navy. St. John of Kronstadt, though himself not a chaplain, was the priest of a naval town, and certainly among his congregants were many sailors. And new martyr St. Vasily Martysz of Poland, who is the patron of their armed forces. Now, St. Paul, in some of his epistles, uses the military virtues as analogies to the Christian faith, just like he uses athletic metaphors. St. Clement did so as well. But, one of the things that we're here to discuss is the thorny subject of the service of priests as chaplains, and whether or not that constitutes an unqualified blessing on Orthodox Christians to serve in the military. First of all, I should state that there's some misperceptions, and let me just attack this head on, that the existence of chaplains does not justify war. That's not the purposes of us having chaplains. When the Russians were reinstituting their chaplaincy, and I had a very small role in that, one of the questions that was put to us, they said, well, will these chaplains operate in the same manner as the commissars who would, stir up people's patriotism and denigrate the enemy before them? I said, not at all. We're to put a human face on the enemy, to avoid excesses in warfare. So we're not there to justify war. In fact, it might surprise you to know that a lot of our chaplains, Orthodox and non-Orthodox, are pretty much pacifists. And to say that chaplains are for war, or that even the members of the armed forces are for war, is like saying that, well, the members of the fire department are for fire. They're not, obviously. So we have this vocation for the military, and it can become a vocation rather than just simply a passion, which I think is one of the things that we're trying to get at, for military things. But it is at one time, it was one time called service. People used to say they did 2 years in the service rather than the military or the armed forces. Those are recent terms. But back when there was a compulsory draft in the United States, most people asked whether or not you were in the service. And I think that's probably the term we would prefer to go with, that we are of service to our nation and to one another. So there are risks and some concerns and dangers to the integrity of faith that our faithful have about priests serving in the armed forces, about sending their sons and daughters away to serve in the armed forces, or just simply how our armed forces are employed throughout the world in what sometimes can be perceived as unjust wars. Just to clarify a few things that are some of the misperceptions, and I'll address these specifically a little bit later. This myth of military dispensation, that somehow our people, don't have to do things the way the church requires them to be done, because after all, they're in the military. And yet, ironically, when people join the military, they subscribe to discipline, honesty, integrity, core values that you wouldn't want to violate in the military institution, and therefore they're consistent with what the church expects to us. So we should be able to, with some difficulty, depending on the environment what one finds themselves, to be able to observe the rules of the church. The other is that chaplains do some kind of a generic ministry, that once we enter the military, we're somehow no longer operating as priests. That's not true either. Although we do have a large constituency of non-Orthodox, obviously, in the units to which we're assigned, and we have to take care of those people in the best way that we can, and more about that later. There is no open communion. We're not required to do that. In fact, we serve our Orthodox services the way they're supposed to be done, and that's the expectation of our faithful. They don't want to come to a chapel service and see some kind of an abstraction of Orthodox worship. They want, for no other reason, a piece of their home parish that they remember. There's ecumenical and interfaith cooperation, but not compromises, because the chaplain corps is made up of many faiths, including non-Christian faiths, and we learn to work with one another. And it often is mutually beneficial because, well, if I have someone of another chaplain's faith in my organization that I can't minister to sacramentally or liturgically, he may have someone of the Orthodox faith that he needs someone to take care of. And so we take care of one another's constituents' needs by making referrals. And even if there's not an Orthodox priest for a non-Orthodox chaplain to send someone to, they may say, okay, what do you need? Where can I buy you a prayer book or an Orthodox Bible, or find you an icon that you want so that you can pray at the designated times? There are some canonical concerns about our ministry being pan-Orthodox. In the chapels, we have Greeks, we have Antiochians, we have Romanians, We have all, Russians, all the different kinds of Ukrainians that there are, so, we have that. And, but we do get along. However, this is something that perhaps we can address a little bit, is that there are also groups that are uncanonical, some that aren't Orthodox or trying to be Orthodox, but that word appears in their title. And one of them may be assigned as a replacement for a canonical Orthodox priest, just because the institution didn't care to learn that an Orthodox Presbyterian is not the same as an Eastern Orthodox priest. And then there's the other idea that, to send a priest into the military is a waste of a good priest. He should be serving a parish somewhere. We have parishes where the priest cannot retire because there's no one to take their place. And so why are we sending younger priests into the armed forces? And then there's even, some professional jealousies, matters about retirement or the wages that we receive. But it isn't about us priests who serve as chaplains. It's about the people that we serve. And that's what makes our ministry unique, because without us, unless someone would be fortunately stationed on a base right next to a civilian church, then, they will have no access to the sacraments or to the life of the church. So, the nature of our service requires a unique perspective, let's say, not unique to the individual, but one that requires us to go through training, chaplain school, which is kind of like our boot camp. It's not a theological school. It does not ordain. It is one that receives clergy who are already ordained, teaches them how to behave as military officers, teaches us the ethical standards of the institution, and then gives us some tools how to deal with family discord or suicide risk, how to point people to the proper resources, even educating us just what kind of resources there are unique to the military, of which we can take advantage. And as I said at the beginning, our opportunities are that we are ministering to an age group between 18 and 25 that you may not find in a lot of parishes. And in the military, unlike college students where there's OCF, without the chaplaincy, there would be no one to reach them, because sometimes our people serve in places where a parish priest cannot go. For that matter, in my retired ministry to the military, I can't go overseas to a base or to a war zone. That's done. There's also, an opportunity to educate the institution and its leaders, especially as we got real smart on Islam when we went to the Persian Gulf to wage war there. And now, as we have made allies of many of the former Soviet bloc countries, and as some of the neocons are talking about war over the Ukraine, that, maybe it's time that they understood something about the faith of the people in those regions. And of course, there are people who are inquirers. Because we're reaching out to that age group, 18 to 25, there are the people who think they've exhausted all of their Christian possibilities. Well, okay, I was Catholic, I gave up on that, I became Protestant, I went to a couple of different denominations, I'm done with that. And then they discover the Orthodox Church, and they find that it's much different. And sometimes it takes years for them. But I'm a product of that. My encounters, because of my assignments overseas with the Orthodox Church, never mind my ancestry that included an Orthodox grandfather, but it exposed me, because of my military service, I was exposed to the Orthodox Church and, shown that it was possible to convert. And I was received into the faith by an Orthodox chaplain. It was 41 years ago this month. So there you have it. Now, we want to preserve the spiritual sanity and the wholeness of our people so they can go back home and go back to the parish they came from if they choose. So we're here not to take a parish priest's sheep, but to sort of lead them through the wolf's den and return them to the sheepfold from which they came, or to set them on the path that they choose, but with their faith intact. That's an important opportunity and obligation that we have, because if we don't take care of our people, someone else will. There are all kinds of servicemen centers in the military towns that'll invite people in, and then we'll witness to them and force them to make an altar call of sorts. There are people who, with the greatest intentions, say, "Oh, you don't have a priest, you're welcome to attend our services, or you're welcome to partake of our sacraments. We're real close to your church, I think, so you can come to us." And so, it's very seductive. And because people are away from the church, marriage outside the church is a huge impediment that a lot of military people engage in. They marry someone overseas, they marry someone outside of the Orthodox Church, and then in some cases that can't even be fixed because the other person is unwilling to convert or even become some kind of a Christian. So, that's it. Now, I just wanted to touch, just to put a little meat on the bones here, talk a little bit about, the history of chaplains and from antiquity on up, if you don't mind, unless somebody has a question so far. Does anybody have a question? Okay, well, in pagan antiquity, obviously, they would have the equivalent of some kind of a religious figure that would accompany the army, mostly a personal, in the commander's personal retinue, and he would be sort of like a seer. He would read the entrails of sacrificial animals and try to predict the outcome of the battle and make offerings to appease the gods. So that was an unknown function in the armies of pagan antiquity. The Israelites, once they got out of the Sinai, as Joshua organized the army, gave the priests a function to precede the army by 200 cubits with the ark. So they basically went in front of the army unprotected, and it would be God that would fight for them. God would ward off their would-be enemies or strike fear in their hearts so that it was easy for the Israelites to overcome them. Where does the name chaplain come from? Well, we did have Christian chaplains in the Roman army after St. Constantine legalized Christianity. And it was one such soldier, St. Martin of Tours, who was on his way somewhere along the road, spotted a beggar on the side of the road who was shivering, and he took off his cloak, divided it in half with his sword, and gave half to the beggar. Now that night, he had a dream, and the beggar was revealed to him to be none other than Jesus Christ. So that half of the cloak that he kept, which was called a kappa, was placed in a reliquary known as a kapelle or chapelle, and the keeper of that was the capellan. And it was the Merovingians who would actually take that as a relic into battle with them. In fact, they made it sort of a standard, to show the Lord's favor as they rode against their enemies. And so that was the beginning of the institution of a formal chaplaincy that many medieval rulers set about having, and various canons and ecclesiastical provisions were made to ensure that the army did not travel without a priest, at least someone to hear confessions and someone to administer the sacraments. That was in the West as well as in the East. When we look at Russia, then of course we see with the reign of Tsar Paul I, we see the organization of a chaplaincy take shape. And he is the first one to have appointed an ober proto-presbyter of the Army and Navy. And he was a senior archpriest, and he was the one who assigned the chaplains or kept tabs on them to ensure they were doing what was required of them. The local bishops, wherever a chaplain was assigned, were the canonical entity to whom that chaplain got his blessings and permissions from. but they also worked for, the chaplains also worked for a commanding officer. Now, the size of the chaplaincy, varied over time. I can give you some idea what it looked like. In 1891, the Orthodox chaplaincy, that's the Army and the Navy both, consisted of 407 chapels, 443 priests, 57 deacons, and 68 readers. So, they actually had an infrastructure built around those military priests. So they were very well organized, and the goal was to have one priest per a major warship or per regiment. And the readers and the deacons were assigned to the bases where a large military chapel had been established. Now, in 1912, as maybe the clouds of war loomed on the horizon, that was increased. There were 653 chapels, 730 priests, 134 deacons, and 99 readers. So it was the armed forces increased, and so did the assignment of chaplains, one per regiment or some other significant unit of great size, commanded by an officer probably of the rank of colonel or above. There's two examples here of what they had in a couple of military districts. And this is to show that it isn't just in our armed forces, that there was a pluralistic sort of ministry involving non-Orthodox or non-Christian chaplains. For instance, in the military district of Siberia, and I don't know what the parameters of what they call Siberia are in this statistic, but there were 19,282 soldiers, of whom 17,077 were Orthodox. 449 were Old Believers, 157 Roman Catholics, 75 Protestants, and 1 Armenian. Of the non-Christians, there were 1,330 Muslims, 100 Jews, and 91 primitive cults. And they had clergy of all those faiths except for the primitive cults, the pagan cults, to service the needs of those service members, even though they were not under the infrastructure of the Oberprocurator or Oberpresbyter of the armed forces. In Kazan, the military district of Kazan, there were 27,998 soldiers, 21,400 of whom were Orthodox, 3,115 Roman Catholics, 591 Old Believers, 1,184 Muslims, and 65 of primitive cults. They kept an exact count. So I am using these figures to the exact digit, because it shows how important religion was regarded in the Imperial Russian Armed Forces. Now, there were never more than 50 non-Orthodox chaplains at any time. And they weren't under the military infrastructure. They were usually assigned from a local religious diocese or whatever the equivalent entity was. And the Old Believers, who were a significant presence in the armed forces, only ever had about 10 chaplains or priests who were chaplains at any one time. So that's the picture of the Imperial Russian Armed Forces. Of course, that ceased in 1917 with the revolution. And as the Soviets absorbed Eastern Europe, those countries that were traditionally Orthodox that also had chaplaincies, those chaplaincies ceased to exist and were not reinvigorated until after 1989 or 1991 in some cases. It was my privilege to play a small role in that. But if we look at our own situation, we're not in an Orthodox country. We are a religious minority, and one that really isn't well known. It's not taught in school. We at one time boasted that we were the fourth major faith, which was a bit of fiction, because there are no major faiths under the Constitution. Our standard is that we either recognize everybody equally, or we don't recognize anyone. And so it is that during the time that there were three major faiths, Catholic, Protestant, and Jew, well, the institution provided that de facto status to clergy of those faiths that were chaplains and to their congregants, and organized accordingly, provided what they needed. Unfortunately, the Orthodox were a new commodity. We didn't have chaplains before 1943, and during World War II there were only 4, and then we didn't have them again until 1951. And then, fortunately, have consistently had them since that time. But because we were rather unknown, our first chaplains had to struggle with how they were going to be employed by the institution. They were simply assigned to a unit, even if there were no Orthodox there. And as far as religious identity was concerned, there were only 4 identities that you could have in your service records or on your dog tags. It was Catholic, Protestant, Jew, or NP for no preference. So some of our earliest chaplains, some of our earliest priests who were chaplains, elected to be listed as no preference because they wouldn't wear another identity. Thanks to a very industrious man at the time from Hollywood, Nicholas Royce, he led a campaign to have religious identity be a little more specific, to include the Orthodox. It was such a good idea to the armed forces that they decided to do that for everybody. So thanks to us, thanks to the initiative of the Orthodox, everybody can have their faith group recorded. Even some groups that are probably non-existent and only exist in the imagination of the wearer of those dog tags. Nevertheless, they have a right to insist that be their religious identity. How we are organized is, some assume it's by quota. We're not enlisted by quota. They used to be the case. The Air Force was the last one to do that, to say, okay, let's decide how many Orthodox people there might be in the Air Force, and we'll recruit that number of priests or maintain that number of priests. When under the Clinton administration after the first Gulf War, they downsized, I received a phone call from the Chief of Chaplain's office and I said, hey, we're going to reduce the Air Force by this many thousand. How many fewer priests do you think that we need? I said, well, how many Orthodox Christian laymen are you going to kick out of the Air Force? Well, so we're not going to kick any Orthodox laymen out of the Air Force. We don't discriminate based on faith. I said, well, there you are, So the Air Force had to come online pretty much like the other services that recruit the best qualified. So if they have, let's say, 200 vacancies and 200 priests would step up to the plate, be physically fit, of the right age and the right attitude, they would probably take them. Of course, that's very exaggerated, but there is no quota system, and there is no examination of what is the faith of most people in the armed forces. Unfortunately, there is sort of a default system when they process people at the military entrance processing station to list everybody as no preference with the hopes that they can get that fixed later on. So just about every person who's ever passed through my chapel of Marine recruits have been listed as other or no preference. And only maybe a couple who are very insistent ever correctly came in with Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox already listed on their dog tags. The chaplains in the Army, Navy, and Air Force, of course, minister in their own institutions, but the Navy is unique in that it also services the Marine Corps and the Coast Guard. So we actually have an opportunity to be with other services and also to be assigned jointly. So today is the Army birthday, and 17 years ago, I was assigned as a Navy chaplain to an Army unit in Iraq. So the opportunity that provides is that we're able to get around even more so among the different branches and provide the ministry that they may not have because they're lacking an Orthodox priest. They did that intentionally in the Vietnam War. They would send what they called a rodeo around. It usually consisted of a Catholic priest, a Jewish rabbi, and an Orthodox priest. And sometimes they would add a Mormon or somebody, a Lutheran perhaps. And they would fly around to the different units that were remote from the headquarters or wherever that chaplain's unit was to provide those services. And then after Vietnam, they didn't do it again, even in the first Gulf War. even though those who had that knowledge of the practice tried to instill that into the institution. Nevertheless, they never did that, and it was kind of by accident. When I went to Iraq, I actually was sent in what was supposed to be a Catholic priest billet. So when I got there, the first question I was asked, "When are you saying Mass?" I said, "You mean liturgy?" Well, okay, well, I guess you could call it that. Wait a minute, are you asking about Catholic services? Yes, we are. Aren't you a Catholic priest? So that was a sort of a fluke that allowed me to go around and offer a ministry that otherwise might not have been there. But in that guise, I also made sure that, well, we took care of the other faiths in a judicious manner by cross-leveling priests and rabbis to units that didn't have them, to allow liberal travel when the combat conditions permitted, for the service members perhaps to go to their chaplain of their particular faith. So it really is a very fluid environment, and it's not a predictable one because of that expression called the fog of war. The fog of war often disrupts conventional military operations, and we're sort of a low priority in all of that, providing religious ministry. General Mattis, who I had the privilege to work for when he wore 1 star, said to me as we were ramping up for possibly going to Afghanistan, he says, "I want you to know something, that when I can support you the least is when I'll need you the most." He said it to me twice. So in other words, he relied on chaplains to use their initiative and not expect things to be ideally handed to them, but to use initiative and to try and get around, even if it meant stealing a Humvee, perhaps. I don't know. About that. I never had to do that. So here we have it. That Orthodox chaplains, proved their worth, and it was a reminder not just that the chaplains can do something, but that we actually have constituents. We actually have Orthodox men and women who have shed their blood for this country for a significant amount of time. In the Civil War, before there were priests in the South, unfortunately, on the wrong side of that war, you had Confederate Greek Company A down in New Orleans, okay? And then you didn't hear about the Orthodox again until maybe the First World War. In the First World War, unfortunately, many of the Orthodox Christians who had come from the Turkish Empire, from the Ottoman Empire, or from Austro-Hungarian Empire were classified as enemy aliens once the United States entered the war. But even before that, a lot of them, eager to fight against their foreign despots, made their way into Canada, where they enlisted in the Canadian Armed Forces. So much so that one priest, Father John Ovsianitsky of Quebec City, became the chaplain to, I guess they formed a regiment of Orthodox Christians around him. And they, at one point, when they threatened to transfer him, they mutinied. And once he was restored to them, they say, okay, now we will gladly march off the war. But the United States didn't have any Orthodox chaplains, and you don't hear much about Orthodox Christians in the First World War. In the interwar period, there was some activity overseas. The Polish Armed Forces, amazingly, had a significant number of Orthodox chaplains, including a bishop as military ordinary. And that, in spite of the fact that they were a very Russian-hating republic at that time, having just broken free of the Tsar. As the war ramped up, the United States, seeing that it was perhaps going to be involved in this, increased the chaplaincy, but didn't think about recruiting minority faiths. Even rabbis were neglected in that process. And so it took the initiative of some of our lay organizations like FROC, now called FOCA, that became sort of a virtual chaplaincy to Orthodox service members. In the absence of priests serving in uniform, they did mailings of materials that the people could use. They made sure that folks that were stationed in military bases close to towns that had churches were aware of that. So they really reached out in the advent of Orthodox chaplains. And as Orthodox candidates for the chaplaincy came forward, they were excluded for one reason or another, mainly because of either citizenship, they were still citizens of another country, language, the lack of language ability, and they weren't fluent in English, or because of age. And then finally in 1943, Father Vladimir Borachevsky became the first Orthodox priest of the United States Armed Forces to be a chaplain, and three others, and then one in the Navy, including one in the Navy, Father Alexander Sanyavsky. And I've been privileged to follow in his footsteps in some of the places where I was stationed. And he was from Minneapolis, Father John. You probably have his picture somewhere in the church. So this was a hard road, though. And after the war was over, as people were mass processed to be discharged, it was perceived that there was no need to maintain Orthodox chaplains. Kind of the reasoning about that the Air Force had when I discussed that earlier, and so they left. And it wasn't until 1951 with the Korean War that you had chaplains coming into the Navy, the new Air Force, which didn't exist, and then the Army did not have any more chaplains until 1962. But in the Korean War, it was there that our priests showed their utility. In World War II, they were assigned mainly to training commands and didn't see action. Father Vladimir Borachevsky was in the Battle of Saipan, but he never went ashore. He was on a ship, which posed some hazards to him, but he wasn't engaged in direct combat. But in the Korean War, that changed, and Father Alexander Sanyavsky, Father, later Bishop Boris Giza, they served with distinction with the Marines in Korea, and the Greeks, the Hellenic armed forces, were involved in that conflict as well, and they actually joined with them, provided ministry to them in some cases, even though the Hellenic armed forces also had, I think they were mainly priest monks who were with them functioning as chaplains. If you ever run across a movie with Victor Mature called The Glory Brigade, they actually show a Hellenic Orthodox chaplain in that movie. Now, the thing is, though, is that we don't exist to be of service to other nations' armed forces. We're here for our own people. And so, we've seen chaplains being assigned to duties that were totally inappropriate, almost to be like intel officers, like, okay, you're Russian Orthodox, tell us about the Soviets. Or, in one case, a priest during the invasion of Grenada was used as a translator because he was fluent in Russian, which it's a violation of the Geneva Convention to do that. And I should mention, and this may be our segue into the topic that I believe Father Ilya is interested in, is that our chaplains are non-combatants, and we are forbidden to bear arms. The Geneva Convention would allow us to wear sidearms for our own protection. But the United States law goes one degree higher and says, no, we may not. We may not bear arms at all, not even a knife. So when our priests, when all of our chaplains go into combat, they're unarmed. There's some speculation what would happen to them. There's even other speculation. What would a chaplain do if he was caught in a firefight and had to fight to save his own life? Would he? But we have some examples among non-Orthodox chaplains who did not fight. Subsequently, one was killed, received the Medal of Honor in recognition of his bravery, ministering to his Marines under fire, Father Combatant. And then we have, other instances with the Father Eli Takesian. Don't let the Armenian name fool you. He was Presbyterian. but he was one of the bravest of the brave chaplains. At one point, his position was overrun by the North Vietnamese. He had to play dead, even to the extent that he was kicked by one of them. Even though weapons were within reach, he refused to pick one up and defend himself. Fortunately, that situation did not play out the way most people would fear, and the North Vietnamese left that position, and the living who were able to fool them, were left alive. Well, as a supervisory chaplain, which I became before the end of my career, I had to discipline, let's say, or enforce the discipline among my subordinate chaplains, regardless of their faith, because there were among them adventure seekers, those who said, "Well, I want to go to the rifle range. I would like to qualify with the weapon because I'll get a badge for doing that. I don't have anything else to wear on my uniform, so I'll get a badge or ribbons to show that I qualified. Or I want to identify with my Marines. So if I go and shoot with them, of course they'll like me. They'll think I'm like one of them." But as one senior enlisted man said to one of the chaplains who went to the range, he said, "Chaplain, I'm prepared to lay down my life for you in a combat situation. But once you pick up a weapon, you're on your own." And, who knows, what a person might do in the heat of the moment, including myself, even though I'm a committed non-combatant and mostly a pacifist, and was resolved that I would go into the war zone and not carry or pick up or use a weapon. One never knows what one will do if I would chicken out under fire and grab a weapon and fight. And I hope you'll notice how I put that to fight for a chaplain, for a member of the clergy, is to chicken out. Because, well, first of all, if they need us to fight, all is lost anyway. They need a better plan if that's what they were relying on. The other things, we have another job to do. We have to go around and reassure people, comfort the wounded, and help the dying. So these are the things that chaplains and priests should be concerned with, not the rigors of war, of waging war. That is prohibited. In fact, it from the earliest time, St. Boniface said that the priests and the bishops who accompanied the medieval armies were not to engage in warfare, not to carry weapons at all, but they were there solely for the spiritual welfare of their armies, the knights and the men at arms. Contrast that with the Crusaders, or even with the earlier Norman invasion, where one Bishop Odo fought with a mace, and the pretext of that was, well, by fighting with a mace, well, I don't shed blood because I only crush the skull. So I think I've gone on in my monologue for enough time, and I've got a wealth of information here to share, but I'll only do that if you express an interest and I have it on hand. Otherwise, I'm open to questions.
I'm thinking it's very, very nice presentation, Father, and I'm very glad that you touched upon the presence of Orthodox in the United States Armed Forces, because the question was as to what the Orthodox chaplain is doing in the U.S. Armed Forces. Yeah, I just had a conversation with a gentleman from Serbia who asked that question. But again, maybe you did touch upon it, but if you could dwell just a tiny bit more. Conception of a priest in the army, someone who's supposed to preach peace, and God's kingdom and everything else, and at the same time violent combat, how that could be reconciled for an average individual. I did have a conversation about someone, and I mentioned you as an example in whatever role it was, and the person was just shocked, says, "What, priest blesses killing?" I said, no, he is there for the spiritual well-being of the soldiers, because they're still human under incredible stress. But still, maybe you could address that a little bit. You've seen war at its worst, and you've seen these men under the tremendous pressure. Could you please describe a bit your ministry in that capacity? I'm not curious to hear war stories. It's just poor taste. But could you talk a little bit more about that, about your ministry as a priest and on the active duty in the active field mission?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that I did not go to war until my 31st year of service. So it was I was already fairly senior in rank by that point in time, and in an environment that many would consider safe. I was at a higher headquarters of the U.S. Third Army, which was the nucleus of a command called the Coalition Land Forces Component Command. So our command was the headquarters for all the British, the Romanian, other countries that contributed ground forces, and of course the Army and United States Army and Marines. So we were located in Camp Doha, Kuwait, and other than a couple of attempted missile strikes made at our headquarters, I mean, everybody knew where it was, so we were sort of an easy target. The people who were in real danger were the ones who crossed the berm, this huge mound of earth that separated Kuwait from Iraq. The ones who ventured into Iraq and up toward Baghdad were the ones who were consistently in danger. But the wars take their toll on people in different ways. It's not just people who are shot or stabbed, or who have been within close range of an explosion, but it's also the people who are stressed by that environment and what they see, what they smell. One of the things that happened during that time, after we commenced hostilities against Iraq, was one of the other members of the staff. He was the logistician, and he had supervision over all sorts of functions, supply, engineers, but also mortuary affairs. So there was the morgue that was on our base, and he said, "I'm a little concerned about some of our people who work in the morgue." Because we were already taking casualties before hostilities. We had friendly fire incidents, we had aircraft accidents, and of course those were gruesome just because of the type of carnage that would result in. So already before people were becoming battle casualties, the people who worked in the morgue had a foretaste of what human carnage was like. And he asked me to look in on them. He said, "Would you please go and check up on the officer in charge and come back and let me know he's doing okay, and his people, if they if he thinks you ought to talk to them, by all means kind of pull them aside and have a word with them." So I went there, and they were taking in casualties, and they said, "Chaplain, would you say a prayer over this dead killed in action soldier?" And I said, "Well, I'm quite sure that his own unit chaplain said the appropriate prayers before his body was evacuated." They said, "Yeah, but we want a prayer." "Ah, so you want a prayer? Okay." And I realized this was their way of bringing closure to themselves. And little questions like, "Chaplain, I can look at this and I think I'm okay with it, but am I okay? Because I'm witnessing, this destruction of a human body, and what's wrong with me that I'm able to see this and be okay?" And I said, "Well, God has given you a talent to restore that image and likeness, because it was these mortuary assistants who did the initial part of putting back together someone whose body had been reduced to smithereens, to try and collect all of the pieces of a person and ensure that integrity for burial. That that was something that required a special person to be able to do, in a similar manner to like a surgeon who obviously goes in, not only it has to operate by cutting the body, but we'll see the injury to the body that they're repairing before they do that. And they're able to withstand that in order to save a life or to save a limb, and still function as normal people in most cases. So it was the opportunity to come alongside people like that I considered more valuable than any fears that somehow I was condoning war. And in my ministry to soldiers and Marines who would often come in with the casualty, with the body, was to restore their hope, to speak with them so that they would not seek vengeance, because they never would locate the source of whatever it was that cost their comrade their life, and so was to ensure that they retain their humanity, and that their victory in that battle should not be won by making themselves a facsimile of the enemy, or by abandoning what is to be human, or abandon their faith if they were people of faith, as many were. And it pained the ordinary fighting man and woman when they had to take a life. They were concerned about it. They were confused by it. And so that ministry was important to reassure them that because they take no delight in that action, that there is hope for them. And if they did take delight in that, then of course I would spend a little more time with them to help them understand that, well, even though war is an ugly business and our mission is the mission of the military is to destroy the enemy forces, there is such a thing as rendering them inhuman in our mind. So to make sure that human face, that image and likeness of God was retained. And that came to light probably when I was asked to pray over enemy dead that were brought in. Some of whom they tried to save their life on the operating table, and it didn't happen. So, I was asked, the fact that they asked me to say a prayer for an enemy combatant was significant. So, we in engaging in warfare, do not diminish the humanity of the enemy. We're sorry we have to fight them. We're sorry that their hearts are hardened, and we pray every day that hostilities could be prevented, and that hearts will be unhardened, and not specifically toward the United States, but as fellow human beings made in the image and likeness of God. And I should say that on my next assignment to Iraq, instead of being in the morgue every day, I was in the surgical ward every day, and I stood through 100. I think I estimate somewhere close to 200 surgeries. Again, it was one of the things where I was asked to go in there when they were about to put a casualty under anesthesia, and I started to leave after I said that prayer, after I was sure that the person heard me before they went under. And one of the doctors one day said, "Chaplain, where are you going?" And I said, "Well," I said, I said the prayer. He says, "But I didn't hear it. You kind of whispered it to him." "Oh, you want me to pray? All right, then I'll pray." And what we did as chaplains is every time that we knew that there were casualties coming in, all the chaplains on our base that were on that part of the base where the surgical ward was, were told to muster there and said, "Okay, we'll dismiss you from there if we don't need you." At first, there was a little bit of pushback, like, "Oh, what are we going to do, for those guys?" I said, "Well, I mean, first of all, we're supposed to pray for them." "Yeah, but I mean during surgery." "Well, okay, Father, you've got a rosary, pray the rosary. Pastor, you've got a Bible, read your Bible. I've got my Combatant, I'll say the Jesus prayer. We were appreciated for doing that, and it had a healing effect on guys like me who had witnessed carnage by being in the morgue before. Now, the fact that lives were being saved, and in many cases even catastrophic injuries to people's limbs, they were able to save them to the extent that they were able to receive a prosthetic that allowed them to live normally once they were discharged from the military. So it was a great story of hope that came to me from that military experience, not one of hatred or enmity or any disregard of human life.
Thank you, Father, very much. Thank you, thank you. I do have a number of questions, but maybe some of our guests would like to ask a question.
Hello?
Dimitri, you have a question?
Yes. Yes, I do. I'm going to turn off the video because I'm driving, okay? But I have a question. Turn off the video. Okay. My question is for Father, in case of, for example, how to explain it? You work as a chaplain. You work for United States government, and the United States government is your employer. And as
Not
a soldier,
anymore.
not anymore. When the chaplain worked for United States.
Okay, when I was a
government.
chaplain. Okay, sure.
Yes, yes, definitely. So in case the soldier can have no free will. I mean, he's under obey of the orders, and the chaplain in some way too. And in case of unjust war, for example, the war like with the Orthodox country, like bombing in Serbia, or even unjust war with some other reasons, like first Iraq war or something, like where they're killing the Orthodox Christians there. So how the chaplain can react, because employer wants that war, and you basically, well, your conscience are you against that war. So what is the contradiction?
Okay. Well, thank you for that question, because it's a very complex issue, and it's not one that's unknown. I mean, I think we can look back to the Second World War when non-Orthodox knew that they had to be fighting against their co-religionists who were members of the Axis allies, Protestants and Catholics in the German armed forces or in the Italian armed forces. And so, as much as they were expected to do their duty, so are we. However, what resonates with me is your concern that perhaps it's an unjust war. And I would dare say that it's becoming more and more within our grasp for the ordinary fighting man to know about, what's about to take place before it happens. Before there was mass communications and things like that, their following orders was done rather innocently because they didn't know all the facts that take place behind the scenes. I can tell you that when we watched, as we were leaning forward to go into Iraq, and we all went into the command center to watch on the Jumbotron Colin Powell's address to the United Nations. And when he only had drawings of what a mobile chemical lab might look like, our jaws dropped. And, we had to, say, I hope they've got something else they just can't share, because to me, that doesn't seem enough. But, we were all obliged to do our duty. And to the credit of the agencies that went into Iraq to find these so-called weapons of mass destruction, they did not manufacture any to fake it. They did not go in there and fabricate the existence of these things. They even found things that resembled yellow cake, but it turned out not to be, and they didn't insist that it was. So there was no justification. Now, did we reinstall Saddam Hussein because we made a mistake? Did we restore the Iraqi dead to life? No, and that's a terrible consequence of that kind of faulty intelligence. But again, not known until after the fact. In the case of the bombing of Serbia, I can tell you that the chiefs of chaplains, these are general officers and an admiral in the case of the Navy, all were opposed to that action and provided counsel to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and to anyone else on the higher levels would listen to them, that this was wrong. And they weren't arguing it, of course, because they knew something about the Orthodox Church or that they were sympathetic with us, but they considered it to be overkill and therefore unethical. But Saint Nicholas of Japan was faced with the same thing. Shortly after his ministry really took off at the turn of the 20th century, there was the Russian-Japanese War. And so, his indigenous Japanese church, which numbered in the hundreds of thousands by that point, they were concerned. They said, well, we're going to have to serve in the armed forces. And they're asking that very question. We'll have to fight against the Russians, and they're our brother Orthodox Christians. And his counsel was to serve their country, to do their duty, to not engage in any sort of overkill, and of course to pray for the quick cessation of hostilities. And he himself, at that point, I believe, ceased functioning as the bishop of the Japanese Orthodox Church, sort of went into monastic seclusion, but in that seclusion he prayed for peace. So what happens when a war is unjust? That's argued at a higher pay grade than most of your rank and file chaplains and the people they serve. But we are going to ensure, we're going to mitigate that by ensuring that people, as I've said before, do not lose their humanity, do not engage in overkill, have compassion toward the casualties on the other side, avoid collateral damage and those sorts of things. And Orthodox priests who served, and there were a couple that actually served in I believe in the NATO force that went into Bosnia and also in Kosovo, even though perhaps they were not completely successful, did their best to plead for the lives of the Serbs, to plead for those villages that were ethnically Serb and were going to be absorbed by the Kosovars. So, we do what we can. Now, this is not to say that there haven't been times when I was motivated to resign, over things like that. I happened to be in war college at the time when we bombed Belgrade over the situation there. And of course, I was not allowed to resign because I owed them the 3 years of service for my education. But I did write the only A paper in my class on that subject and why it was wrong. So, a paper does not make up for the lives that have been lost, especially among the innocent. But it is an opportunity by us being present to be able to advocate. And, it's been my role all along in the Iraq War. It was my duty, as I saw it, to plead for the life of enemy units when we were going to go in there with devastating air power and decimate them. To say, General, isn't there some other way, to do this? And whether or not that I never got a bomb damage assessment, and I was never told about the mission because that was higher than my level of clearance. But it is an opportunity, and that's the reason we have chaplains, is to advise and to make sure that everyone from the lowest rank and file soldier carrying an M16 to the general who's making the decisions has an appropriate advisor to say, are you sure about this? I don't know if I've answered your question, but I'm certainly welcome to hear some other. If you take exception to anything I've said, I'm willing to listen to that.
Thank you, Father. It's not a full answer, but probably nobody can answer full that question, controversial question. But anyway, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Father, I would thank you very much. I want to rewind a little bit to the opening statements that I made, and would like to ask you, if of course you can, nobody knows the reason or everything else, why many of our dear colleagues still, I don't know how to approach it in order to be polite and unoffensive and not to misquote the subject of quote unquote lay priests, non-chaplains, bearing arms, defending it, quoting constitution, quoting need to fight dangerous animals, thugs, governments, George V's, electric eels, flying squirrels and such. Any and all of the above at the same time and momentarily. I naturally believe that we all have to have the right for self-defense, but that ultimate fascination with instruments, ultimately of aggression and killing, under the normal circumstances, have to be subdued and not to discuss. But nevertheless, still there is a lot of passion when this very subject is mentioned. You very clearly said that about how it is important to keep the human face even in the face of war, how important to remember that this is an abnormality and duty is done under the order for the lack of other better peaceful solution. What constitutes in your mind the very fact of this fascination with this anti-Christian instruments, with all sorts of justification given, but basically comes down that boys just like their toys regardless? Are we betraying as to who we ought to be? Again, I'm not talking about extraneous circumstances where nobody knows how we're going to act. I'm talking about daily life under which the supposed, or those who are called to be peacekeepers, are really pronouncing the desire for or their manifestation that they not going to subdue themselves from violence, need be, whether the life is real, where the need is real or just seeming.
Well, even though we're addressing civilian priests, I'll take us back to when I was in chaplain school, and we had a lot of classes discussing the non-combatant status of chaplains and the ethical considerations that went with that, and the demeanor of many of my classmates. I was the only Orthodox priest, but there were people of all denominations, some of which that in their faith they don't have a problem with clergy arming themselves, but the challenge that went out from those kinds of chaplains was, why are you trying to make us be like the Catholics? Of course, some of the Catholics were eager to bear arms too, but that was the challenge that came from one chaplain. So David was a warrior, and I think I should be allowed to follow his example. And the quick answer for them was, well, it's because it's the law, because it's an order, and it's not a Catholic standard, it's not a pacifist standard, it's a military standard. All right, that's your status as a chaplain, just as if you were a doctor or a nurse, you would also be a non-combatant. So it's prohibited to you, and with good reason. And we thought this out a long time ago and decided it's the right thing. And then the follow-on question was, well, what if people don't respect the Geneva Convention? And this was during the Cold War. So of course they're saying, do you think that that if we're captured by the Soviets or the Chinese or the Cubans, that they're going to respect the fact that I'm a member of the clergy and a chaplain and a non-combatant? So I think I have the right to defend myself. And of course, since we were in the Cold War, or after we've been in the Cold War so many years, and that was a consideration, because very few chaplains who were captured in Korea, I don't know that any chaplains were captured in Vietnam, but the ones in Korea did not come back. So that probably gave them a little bit of ammunition, and no pun intended, to their argument. However, then you had two countries that went to war over the Falklands, Great Britain and Argentina, both of them with chaplains. So that was the other argument, was that, okay, so you say that nobody would respect the fact that you're a member of the clergy, but here's an example of two countries that are religious, that have clergy, that have chaplains, who are nevertheless non-combatants, but who are also at risk, the same kind of risk we're asking you to embrace. So that it was still argued by some of them that wasn't a good enough example, and it was kind of like, okay, so you join the military maybe with a fascination for the military and not with so much the intention of serving the people of God that are in uniform, but so that you yourself could put on a uniform and play soldier, to play war, and of course when you use real weapons, then that of course becomes more than play. I found it unusual from some of our Orthodox priests. There were a couple that said, "Oh yeah, I go to the range, I shoot, I want to earn the badge, I want to identify with my people." Say, Father, we're the faith that prays before icons. When you're shooting at a dog target, that's supposed to represent a human head and shoulders. How can you reconcile shooting at a dog target and then the next time you're in chapel praying before an icon? It just doesn't make sense. Okay, so I mean, and that of course applies even more so when our profession as clergy doesn't involve ministry to people who bear arms. I mean, yeah, there are police department chaplains, okay, and I've known some of them, FBI chaplains, that have gone to the firing range with their people, and they say, "Oh, I pick up the weapon and I fire it just to know what these guys go through when they pull the trigger. The weight of the weapon, the recoil, what it's like to sight in on somebody." Sorry, that's not good enough for me. I think you make a better statement by saying, "I won't pick up a weapon." And I, there were times when I was offered a weapon. I was offered a weapon on a patrol one time when I was being taken somewhere by a doctor of all people, who said, "That cross isn't going to save you." I said, "Well, whatever." I said, "But I'm not gonna use the weapon. So maybe you want to drop me off here, and I'll find somebody else to ride with." Something that I won't say that I'm a hero for doing that, but it does require some courage to face up to uneven sides, and when the other side is armed and you're not, obviously they have an advantage. And you, of course, you gave them the out by saying you never know what one will do to defend their family or themselves. That's exceptional. But when somebody has the fascination, when someone is predisposed to do that, it's problematic. And that was what I used to say to my chaplains. I said, if you are, it's one thing if in the heat of battle you decide that you have to defend yourself, and then I hope that when you are safe and you get back to the rear, you quickly resign your commission as a chaplain. But if you're predisposed to do that anyway, even before it becomes a necessity, then you should resign now. Become a line officer, become a regular soldier, because that's not what we want chaplains to be about. You've got other things to be doing when that's going on. But I've known, clergy who, have weapons because they had them before they were ordained. I know them that have them because they go hunting. That, with the exception of our brethren in Alaska who are in a subsistence lifestyle and live in the bush where there are no supermarkets, those clergy hunt, but they don't hunt for sport. They don't hunt for the thrill of stalking game and mounting a trophy on their walls. In fact, in that culture there, they actually give thanks to the animal that gave itself so they could eat. So, and then when we're talking about having weapons just in case we need to take a human life, we're never going to thank them for giving their lives so that we could live safe and sound. So I just I have a problem with it just like you do. I don't know what the solution is, but I believe that the more we attempt to see the humanity of the other person, just sort of like sighting in on a target that looks like a human torso, The more we try to see the humanity of the other person that we might have to take aim at, the more we might be reluctant to do so.
Thank you, Father. Father John, you have any questions? Paul, anybody? No.
I heard a story out of Syria of the priest at Malula who took up weapons after the Al-Qaeda associated terrorist shot his daughter. And I was thinking about that, you know, and that terrible dilemma that no one ever wants to find themselves in of how would they respond, you know, because that's not the vocation, but I can't judge him, you know.
Yeah, and neither can I, and nor do I, because I don't believe he had a predisposition to do that, even when there was danger. Because if he had known there was danger, perhaps he would have evacuated himself and his family. And I'm not faulting him for not doing that. But, you know, it just shows that up until that point, he had trust in humanity, even in people who were very different from himself. But yeah, it's one of those things where I cannot imagine what it would be like to be in that position. And you know, of course, we're you know, there's been these scenarios often in movies, but I think I've heard of some, even in the case of you know, modern Christian martyrs during the Soviet times, you know, who were told that, you know, if they, you know, murdered, you know, one of their fellow Christians, well, I don't know if they were priests or not, they would save their life, and you know, some did, some didn't. It's sort of like the you know, in the camps, in the concentration camps, where even though it was hopeless for many of the Jews who were there, some of them accepted employment by the camp authorities, like the Sonderkommandos, you know, that you know, worked clearing out the gas chambers, in exchange for perhaps possibly being able to live a little longer. You know, so, you know, what will we do? And by the way, there's a book called Borderlands that discusses, I think, the interwar period and all the way up into the Second World War, that has a lot of vignettes that talk about, you know, this isn't black and white. It's very gray what one would do. But those are extraordinary circumstances, not one where someone is actually leaning forward and saying, yeah, let them come. I'll take care of them. I'll show them. Now, that's a predisposition and a lack of faith in humanity.
Father, do we have enough time for one more question?
Yes, yes, of course.
Yes, my question is about, in the United States here, it's a freedom of religion, of conscience. So it's not, you know, it's Institute of Chaplains, it's by free will of the soldier, right, to go or not for confession or communion. But
Yes.
How about in an old time, for example, like pre-revolutionary Russia, when the Institute of Chaplains was insist in the way of majority of definitely of the privates and officers was Orthodox, and the influence of the general crowd to participate in that. And even for people, it's not a choosing, it's sort of pressure to use it. Is it may create some kind of hypocrisy of just to pretend to be, so give like a negative reaction of the.
And we had that up until 1973 in our own armed forces, where, you know, on Sunday morning, you were going to chapel. It didn't matter which one you went to. You were going to, you know, leave the barracks and you were going to be seen in church someplace. You know, and I was in during those years. I joined in 1972, and there was compulsory chapel. And if you were Orthodox, I wasn't at that time, but if you were Orthodox, as many people I later served with attested, you know, they were given a choice. Well, go to the you can go to the Catholic service, or you can go to the Protestant service. And sometimes in different places, that was also imposed upon the Jews, because there was no rabbi to conduct a service on Friday or Saturday. So, you know, yeah, it is patently unfair. and it's contrary to the free will that God gives us. He desires us to serve Him out of free will, not because we're compelled to. Were you present though when I was giving some statistics from the Imperial Armed Forces earlier on in the presentation?
Yes, Father, I was from the beginning. Yes.
Okay, all right, very good. Yeah, so you can see there was an effort, for them to minister to the non-Orthodox, but there was chapel call. There's actually, music that was played on parade, for people to be marched off to the service they would have to attend. But there's a story though that it's from World War I that I believe the Germans captured, I guess it was a battalion of Russians, and a significant number of them were Muslims. And so they divided the Russian prisoners into different camps by their faith, using propaganda on them in various ways. So if there were Lutherans, they were appealing to them because, well, a lot of the Germans were Lutherans. And if they were Orthodox, of course, well, they're hopeless because they were Orthodox. But the Muslims, they tried to say, yeah, and so you're oppressed by this overpowering institutional state religion. Now you're free. And the Muslim prisoners said, yeah, we're so happy, we're grateful for the conditions in the camp. We'd like to sing you a song. And so they sang Bože Sajakrani, God Save the Tsar. And of course, then the Germans left them alone after that. They didn't try to divide them any further. So, I know that there were probably extreme examples. One of the duties of a regimental chaplain or a regimental priest was to rebuke offenders. The two secular duties he had, occasionally being schoolmaster, being a third, but was to keep the regimental standards in the chapel. And also, when someone received unit punishment, then after that, after they've been flogged, they went into to see the priest for a dressing down by him. So yeah, there are some institutional peculiarities that sort of denigrate the worth of the institution of chaplaincy for its real purpose. And that is to give spiritual lives to our men and women who are engaged in this ugly business of war, and to see them return to civilian society whole, unscathed, and still in a state of grace. And I probably didn't answer your question all the way, but I'll think on it more.
Yes, you did, Father. Thank you very much. I'm unmute myself again. Thank you.
What in general way of observation, very often in the arguments with approach to Christianity, violence, and non-violence, there are examples of multiple warrior saints that we as Orthodox have. However, the very fact as to why they were canonized, not as warriors but as martyrs, whose victory was in the cross of Christ, is completely negated. The later legends put up front about various mortem miracles, but at the same time the original respect came that they refused to fight for their faith. I'm talking only Boris and Gleb. I'm talking about all the earlier martyrs, most notable examples being 40 martyrs of Sebastian, who precisely abdicated the army service in order to confess and profess their faith. So whenever arguments are made about various ancient or medieval characters, very often it is forgotten that main reason as to why we have them in the calendar is the absolutely profound, what could be interpreted as pacifism. And only as empire evolved, the capacity as a warrior and militant protector, aggressive protector, was assumed. Of course, this all has to be taken into consideration, I think. And even as I say, we live in an environment where absolute pacifism are perhaps unfortunately unattainable. Nevertheless, we need to be honest as Christians as to what our examples and role models are and why we consider them to be role models and such. And just in a way of observation and in tone of what we've been talking about with you, Father.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and of course the first level of honesty a young man or woman has to have vis-a-vis the faith and military service is if they embrace the military, if they join the military, then they have to be prepared, to be a combatant, unless they're doing it as a chaplain, of course. But to be honest with themselves and honest to the institution, once they accept that calling, then of course they would be free to declare themselves later on a conscientious objector, as long as they're willing to face the consequences of that. So we have had many people that and I processed several, including one or two Orthodox who said, after they had been enlisted for some time and were successful, but they said, I really can't live with the potential of going to war. One of the concerns, is often, well, you're not a Jehovah's Witness, you're not a Quaker, so on what basis can you make this claim? But the claim is not subjective. It is one that's evaluated on a sincerely held belief, where you want to say you don't believe in war. Tell us about your past. What are your passions? What are the things that you've engaged in? So if a person is going target shooting and doing martial arts and collects military miniatures and then claims they're conscious objector, that might be in dispute. But if they have demonstrated through their life consistently and are witnesses to that they're gentle people, then definitely they would be considered for discharge based on conscious objection. In one case, I used to give an anecdote. There was one guy who I approved. He wasn't Orthodox, and he says, "Well, how long is this process going to take before I go home?" I said, "Well, it could take a couple of months." "Well, I just want to get home before the recruiter gets transferred because I'm going to punch his lights out." So, all right, let's come on back here. Let's review that package again, because that doesn't exactly show that you're sincerely hold these beliefs of nonviolence. And the thing with some of the early martyrs, is that some of them actually were willing to go on until they experienced that compromise, where they were going to be forced to sacrifice. So I think some of them, not to disagree with you, because I think for the most part it was that case, and it was going to be the case, whether they probably knew it or not, that sooner or later they were going to be asked to renew their oath of enlistment, which would involve some kind of a sacrifice to idols, or to do some kind of act that would be contrary to their Christian beliefs. But some of them actually, I think, held on and were, because in a few of the biographies, it says they were well respected by their soldiers. I think actually it was Theodore Stradolates, Theodore the general. And his soldiers were ready to rebel to free him, and he said, "No, don't do that. I don't want anybody to get in trouble because of me," and he went willingly to his martyrdom.
I absolutely have no objection to it, and in fact, perhaps if not for compromise of what they believe to be, a sacrifice to the genius of the emperor, that was inconsistent or incompatible with their religiously held belief, they were not about to quit the army. So yeah. It wasn't just an issue of violence, because naturally there were soldiers and they had to fulfill the orders, and naturally they were fulfilling the orders. But, you know, I'm thinking that contrasts with some alarmist call to arms in defense of the faith, whenever, especially when the danger is perceived. So examples of the past that are cited into support of the position actually teaches the contrary, that we are to die for the belief, not to kill for our belief. And this, I thinking, makes a very big difference between Christian martyr and Shahid, the one, you know, who takes his life but takes also the life of those who are around him, and at the same time the one who consciously doesn't bear arms but you know, chooses fulfillment of God's will upon, you know,
and perhaps you know, their hope and their fervent prayer was that, you know, the empire would convert, you know, at any moment, you know, so it just attests to their strong faith, even if they held on against hope, you know, until again they were forced to make that choice. But I'll just share with something from the Pedalian, you know, and this obviously would have been later. I don't know what council it comes from, but it stipulates that to wield the sword for the defense is honorable, for should the barbarians and infidels succeed, neither piety nor sobriety nor the maintenance of honor will remain. So, you know, probably after the age of Athanasius and of Alexandria and Augustine, you know, where they were differentiating between killing and war and murder, and the inception of the so-called just war theory. But again, the higher calling, obviously, among our military saints are those that, you know, forsook all in order to follow Christ, and that meant setting aside successful careers and even going to their death.
Thank you, Father. Well, it's 9:47 up on the East Coast, and we've been together for almost 2 hours, so there's time for perhaps a question or two, if you'd like to ask Father Jerome, and then we'll be calling for our prayer to conclude our meeting.
Okay.
Anybody?
Going once?
Going twice? No. All right.
Sold. Would you like me to say a prayer?
Yes, Father, please do.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Well, I'll do one, whether it's applicable or not, because we're not in such a state of war. But this is a prayer from the Orthodox Soldiers Prayer Book from 1915 in Russia, and it's actually a prayer for our enemies. And it says, "Take also, O Lord, our prayer as sinners on behalf of our enemies, who, although they are in war against us, nevertheless are our brothers, because you are the Almighty Father for them as well as for us. Amen."
Amen. Well, thank you very much, Father Jerome. It's a great pleasure to have you along. Thank you very much for everybody who joined us, and greetings to those who are going to watch this program or meeting in the recording. Please keep checking the profile, because there are more interesting guest speakers are coming, and we're certainly going to have more very interesting lectures in the weeks and the days and the weeks to come. And Father Jerome, thank you very much. Father John, good to see you. Vlad, Paul, Michelle, everybody whom I know and whom I don't know, and looking forward to be together with you again. Thank you, and may God bless you all. Thank you, Father dear.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Father Jerome.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.